Here is here, the artist who co-curated with me, which was an archival exhibition, which also had a screening of the Rouge. It was an archival exhibition of the 15th, I mean, it's women in the Ethiopian student movement. So it had the Rouge as part of the exhibition, which is the birth of the Rouge. There was a research-based exhibition that led to the screening and the...
Now. Hi, Salem. Thank you so
Hi,
much.
Maya.
Thank you so much for making the time to have this chat with us. I'm just going to go straight into the question. So, watching the film, it was very powerful. So many emotions that I felt watching the stories of these three women, and also just overall, what was happening there and what you managed to capture in this film. Thank you so much for that. I guess maybe the main question that I want to ask you, and hopefully this is also something that the audience might be also thinking about, is you chose to show us the story, this film, through the experiences and the lives of Ababa Tarhas and Tadala. And I wanted to ask you why these three women, why you chose to show the story through these three women who to me seem to have, a lot in common, but also they are such different experiences, such different also women, their energies and how they are, the decisions they've made. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask you that.
Let's see. It was my first ever time to go to the Sudan. I had a real difficult time getting in, and it was the support of the Eritrean, Eritrean something association. Oh God, I forgot. They helped me get in there. So when I got there, I had one contact, and not an Ethiopian. It was a Sudanese woman who introduced me to basically to Tadela, who is the first woman in the story. She was working for the Sudanese Council of Churches. And so through the Student Council of Churches, I was able to meet Ababa. And through the Student Council of Churches, I was able to go to those two refugee locations, Gadaref, and so I wasn't necessarily looking for any specific person. When I was doing the research, I just wanted to find out who was there, what was happening to them, and who was willing to talk to me. So Tadela was my entry into that, into the whole group. Once I got Tadela, and once I got Ababa, and Ababa was in Khartoum, Tadela took me to Gadaref and to the other camp, where there were so many different groups of people, but they were all kind of living together. I mean, one, they had no choice, but at the same time, they were living together so well and sharing whatever it was, the difficulties and the experiences together. So I did the group thing with Tadela. She was my entryway. But then the individual Ababa was the one who was from Addis, but she was Eritrean. But she was not connected with the Eritrean struggle or anything like this. So she presented me a different kind of experience. And then the other person, of course, Terhas, I got to know through Tadela again. And Terhas had a completely different story. She was Eritrean. She was displaced because of the struggle. And she had a unique story, who was a well-to-do woman when she was in Eritrea, and then came with her, possessions and stuff, and they were doing really well until her husband abandoned her. So that was another kind of different story. So there were layers of them that made it very interesting for the structure of the story. Ababa's story, who was displaced because her husband was threatening to do something to her. Tadela's story, who was working as a professional woman, who was a refugee, and also not having a great relationship with her husband, but that was a different story. And I had to tell it very subtly because she wasn't really forthcoming in a straight way. And then there is Terhas, who was furious with her husband for abandoning her with 4 children. So that kind of I then actually did not have a roster of people to talk to. They just kind of landed on my plate, and they gave me that story.
Wow.
Well, those stories, they were definitely, each one of them had their own different, but the commonality was that there were women who left home to find a safe space, and they were struggling under all the completely untold ways of the international role in refugee experiences.
I think also what you said at the end about these stories that were not told or that, were not, that you don't see in media. This is something that you touched upon at the beginning of the film where you mentioned how you were also looking in anguish at what was happening and what kind of media chooses to depict and the kind of images you see, and now the story that you chose to tell. And as a journalist myself, sometimes a lot of the times actually, I do kind of face this question about what stories do I tell about a certain event that's happening, And more recently, it's another conversation I had with filmmakers about the kind of balance between, healing through storytelling, making sure that the story is told, but then also the pain and then kind of reliving the trauma. And so I also wanted to know, when you made this film, how was that decision making for you? Did it change throughout the process? And even at the end, looking back, how did you feel about it? Because to me, I felt so many complex emotions. There was anger and frustration, but also I was sad, but also I'm, I was also like inspired. There was just a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things about documentary filmmaking is that you're supposed to be kind of a distant observer without necessarily getting emotionally involved. And this was very, very difficult. While at the same time, it was also my story. It's not, I'm not there to document something and something that's not related to my own, somewhat personal experience. Although I was never a refugee, I was still an immigrant in a foreign land. I happened to have chosen to come instead of being driven out. So there was that tension. Um, but at the same time, I was also privileged to be there with a crew, uh, and seemingly, well off in comparison to their lives. So there was that tension as well, and what makes me any different from these people? Um, so I could see, when you're behind the camera, you know how you kind of forget that you are involved in their lives. I mean, in a way, you kind of you are asking these questions and saying, "So why did you come? What are you doing? What happened to you?" So when I was listening to that, because I was behind the camera, I wasn't necessarily directly interacting with them as like person to person. So that kind of kept me from saying, "Oh my God, I can't bear to hear this." I wanted them to tell me. Uh, but first, I had to get their trust. And they did. I don't know why they do that, but nobody talks to them. So for me to have been there as a woman, to asking them how they are, what is happening to them, why they are there, they felt comfortable enough to go into some more intimate stories. Like Terhas was really she I don't think she had ever really talked to anybody about what had happened to her. So that I think hers was the most intimate story. Um, Ababa, she had a bit of a scheming character to her. Yeah, and I'll tell you one minor story that was really interesting because I had met all three of them before I came back to film. So I went from Khartoum back to Addis, and she knew I was going to Addis, so she gave me a photograph to take to her family. And she was sitting at a typewriter, like she was a secretary. That was the photograph she wanted me to take to her family. And I did. And that was how I got the stories of her children and the tape that they sent to her and that I played back. And that kind of uh, gave me a different way of also of telling her story. So it was interesting that they did not want to be portrayed exactly as they were living. So there was an effort to somehow make it look better than it was. And so I was willing to go with that. Uh, so yeah, there are all those complicated ways of relating to these experiences, and that was I was aware of that all the time.
That's interesting, that you were also able to bring the recordings back to her. Okay,
Yeah,
you were able to do that.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
There was something that she mentioned about how she would rather stay silent than have them think good or bad of her and have them feel a certain way. And so, yeah, I see.
Yeah, so she had to show them that she was doing well by sending a photograph of her as a secretary instead of a, office cleaner.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right. Thank you so much. Maybe as just a final quick question to wrap it up. To me, when I was looking at the story, I was listening to the Sudanese woman talk about how initially when Ethiopian and Eritrean, in fact, refugees were coming, that there was no, that there was not a lot of compassion in the way that people treated Ethiopians or in how they viewed them and how it was even kind of an insult to be called a Habesha. And now today I see that, you know, a lot of Sudanese are in Ethiopia. To me, it was a kind of, we need to know our history in order to have also compassion, you know, because it's such a cycle. But then also it was a shelter for us or for Ethiopians at one point, and today it's like that. And I wonder how you see that, and also
Mm,
perhaps even more broadly how film or how
yeah.
as a filmmaker that plays um,
Breaks
in
my heart.
fostering this. Yeah.
It breaks my heart because there's Magda, the Sudanese woman, who is a good friend. She's been displaced because Khartoum is no longer a place to live in. Her family has been displaced, and it's a tragic cycle for all of us. It's like now they're in Ethiopia, not being terribly well treated. Um, and the international community has completely abandoned them. I think in those days, there was, in whatever minimal way, there was the international community, and, you know, somewhat taking care and making sure that they were secure. Um, when I went in 1989 to do the research, Numeri was still in power. When I went back in 1990 to do the filming, Bashir was in power. And you know, there was a major difference between between the treatment of the two regimes. But still, the international community intervened. Now that's not even there. So yeah, it's very sad, it's very tragic, and we should feel more responsible for, you know, keeping them safe and taking care of them, because they took care of us, you know.
Yeah.
They took care of us, no matter in whatever, you know, dysfunctional way that they did for many years.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Thank you so much, Salim. It was such a powerful film, and hopefully, you know, at some point you'll be able to also talk about it in person.
I
Um,
would love to.
yeah. Thank you so
Well,
much.
I'm coming in a month and a half, I
That's
think.
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Amazing. Thank
yeah,
you.
and thank you, all the audience, for being there. Thank you so much for seeing this film, which is relatively old, but the story is not. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thanks so much, Salim.
Bye. Good morning and
It's okay. Bye.